Armed conflict has been with us since the dawn of civilization. Archaeologists have unearthed evidence of armies as far back as 10,000 BC. Military history has always existed on a grand scale, with legendary battles fought on land, sea, and air. From ancient daggers to modern medals of honor, in expert hands, these relics reveal the stories of those who are no longer here to speak for themselves. Join us as we unlock the secrets of Militaria. Today on Militaria, we look at the story of the Canadian Army Medical Corps through a canteen, the tunic and secretary belonging to a colonel of the First World War, and General James Wolfe's pocket watch that has endured through the centuries. Kevin traces the history of a pocket watch once belonging to General James Wolfe to a descendant of his right-hand man.
I have to say, with no offense to anyone that's come before, this is the most amazing artifact, I think, for me, that I've been involved in with this program.
Gary looks at Colonel James Leighton Ralston's uniform tunic, as well as his secretary box that carried correspondence and writing supplies.
Can definitely throw off the whole day, but it's also in a good way. It throws off the whole day. So you stop what you're doing because this is obviously significant.
Gary examines a medic's canteen from the Second World War.
And that's maybe why I submitted this, because it does have that sort of connection to me.
You're
that, you know, if he was wounded and didn't die right away, then he would have, you know, been in the system. I brought in a canteen, and I was told it was a hospital canteen. My name is Chris Day. I work for Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and I'm from Hammonds Plains. I just come across it in my travels somewhere. I thought it was kind of neat, and probably bought it.
The Second World War saw the Royal Canadian Army Medical Corps move to the front lines, immersed in the battlefields alongside soldiers. The pressures of the front lines intensified an RCAMC medic's duty to not only caring for the wounded, but deciding who would benefit from evacuation and who would not. Though attacking medical personnel was considered a war crime under the Geneva Convention, it could not guarantee immunity from enemy fire. Over 100 RCAMC personnel would lose their lives. In 1959, Army, Navy, and Air Force medical services joined to form the Canadian Forces Medical Service, before merging with the Canadian Forces in 1968. Because of their courage and selflessness, the Canadian medics of World War II were held in the highest regard among their peers.
Welcome, Chris, to Militaria, and I wonder if you could please tell us what you brought in.
Well, it's a military canteen. I was told it was a hospital canteen.
When we look at this, on the top there's got the manufacturer, and it's got the date, and it's 1943, so we know that it is from the Second World War. And as you can see, this turns into a nice little cup. Normally, canteens are smaller than that were carried in the Second World War, and they weren't carried with something like this.
Right.
So this setup here is so that the medic could have a second canteen with them, so that they're not sharing their own water, but they've got, this is for the patients or for the casualties.
Yeah.
And it's bigger, it carries more water in it, so they're able to administer it as required. To call it a hospital canteen is, I think, a bit of a stretch, because in the hospital they're going to have pitchers and they're going to, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
This is made to be out in the field with a medic that's out there doing their job, tending to the wounded. The Royal Canadian Army Medical Corps, which is the sister of the Royal Army Medical Corps, which we ascertain is probably where this came from, had its origins in 1885 in the Northwest Rebellion. So the field force was mobilized, and the Department of Militia realized that they needed some sort of medical service to administer to the needs of the soldiers when something happened to them. So there wasn't someplace, as we discussed with, during the war, a medic finds the soldier, administers aid, goes back to the aid station, the doctor looks at him and then pushes him along the medical chain. There was no chain to push it to.
Yeah.
Northwest Rebellion, they realized they needed something, so they started the Canadian Army Medical Corps in 1898 and started mobilizing units and doctors and nursing sisters.
We never thought it was that early, like
Yeah.
back to the time of the Northwest Rebellion. Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess when you think about it, you say, well, of course, they needed some
Yeah,
medical help.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Chris, you'd mentioned earlier that your grandfather's brother had served in the Second War, was a casualty, and died as a result of his wounds and buried in France. And I was wondering if you could tell us more about your grandfather's brother.
His name was William Stanley Day. He went by Stanley. He was born in July of 1906. He was a fisherman from Pope's Harbor, Nova Scotia. So he didn't join up until like 1943 or something, and at the time he was 37. And I was told, like I said, going back just when I was a kid, like they mentioned that when he went to go overseas, they said, well, you don't really have to go because of your age. But he said, I signed up, so away he went, and he was killed in, I think, July of 1944. That's when he died. So he is buried in Benny-sur-Mer in France.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my goal, is one day I want to go over and visit. I was told he was part of an anti-tank crew. Now, whether this is true or not, I don't know. And supposedly their gun was blown up. And he was the only one that survived, and then he later passed away. You know, if he was wounded and didn't die right away, then he would have, been in the system until he passed away.
Do you know if any of his artifacts are still in the family?
I don't know of anything. I don't even know where his medals went. And it wasn't something that was talked about a whole lot either.
And the fact that it went to the next of kin, these all came in little boxes, there's nothing saying, they probably were never mounted together anyways. So they probably stayed in boxes someplace in a drawer, or, maybe your great-grandmother wore the cross on certain occasions, or maybe it was something that was really hard for her and she just put it away.
Yeah, it was, like I said, my dad was the one that told me.
Right.
So, and I presume, like, he must have heard the stories, right? Mm-hmm. So, and other than that, I really wouldn't know much about him, because he was killed long before I came along, right? So, yeah. So, but like I say, there's so many families in Canada. That's the story, right? Like,
yeah. And it's also as hard, depending on how large the family is. It could be safely in some distant cousin's possession now that you don't know about. So, Chris, thank you so much for coming in to Militaria with your canteen. What were the plans for it? I realize this is something you've picked up, and this, and you've got a little bit of a tie to the family. But are there plans for it in the future?
I don't know. Right now it's just hanging on the back of the chair. So maybe if there's anything I can do to further maybe keep it, and maybe down the road I might look at donating it to something, like maybe your outfit.
So, Chris, once again, thank you for coming to Militaria and bringing your canteen.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. My great uncle, I feel he very well might have drank from one of those. Right. That's what I find kind of neat.
Coming up on Militaria.
To me, he has a long history of service to all of Canada. It's not just a Nova Scotia story, but all of Canada. My name is Shara Kingston. Today I brought in the secretary in uniform belonging to Colonel James Leighton Ralston. I brought in this artifact today because of its significance, not just to Nova Scotia, but all of Canada, just considering the personality that is behind the artifact.
Colonel James Leighton Ralston began his impressive career in Amherst, Nova Scotia, where in 1903 he started practicing law. Over the next decade, Ralston immersed himself in local politics, but pressed pause on litigation and legislation when World War I came calling. Ralston's extraordinary service in Nova Scotia's 85th Battalion earned him a promotion to Lieutenant Colonel in 1918, and 6 years later to Colonel. With his military achievements accumulating, Ralston returned to politics, overseeing the national defence portfolio in 1926, and then again in 1940, when he became a voice for Canadian soldiers during World War II. Ralston's career was compromised when his views on conscription clashed with Prime Minister Mackenzie King's. Today, the Colonel is remembered for his unwavering advocacy for the military and its members.
Cheryl, welcome back to Militaria. And I was wondering if you could tell us what you brought in from the Army Museum today.
I'd love to. So I brought in 2 artifacts representing the First World War service of Colonel James Leighton Ralston. So we have his tunic from the First World War from the 85th Battalion, as well as what we call a box, or has been known as a secretary.
So the secretary is quite interesting in that, you know, all his correspondence and everything that he would have needed as an officer would have been done using the contents of this box, realizing, of course, this was his office. In here would be the areas for the inkwells, the pens and such, paper and envelopes, and then that would come out, and below it would be storage. We also have his tunic from the First World War. He was with the Highland Battalion, so we've got a cutaway here because Highland battalions wore kilts. About 1916, the officer's rank migrated from the cuffs up to the shoulder on the epaulet, and that was a matter of that. This was rather obvious to the enemy, and you'd see all this and go, okay, that's an officer, so that's the first guy we're going to kill. And when we got rid of all this and just had pips up there, it was hard to see. However, obviously, Colonel Ralston really didn't care about that. He would rather have his rank down here, and he never moved it. When you look at it from a distance, it's quite obvious because you can see it from the front. So they get to the field, and by about 1916, they realize this is not really a good idea, and the officer's rank migrated to the shoulder. Ralston obviously was having none of that, and he kept it down there, and that was probably a point of pride of his, is that, you know, I'm a leader. I want my soldiers to know who I am and where I am, and this is the way I'm doing it.
Particularly this item, for me, indicates his service. I know that officers would have had these, but looking at the information and the stories, is that he wrote a letter to every service person within his battalion that was killed, wrote their families. And when I look at this box, that's what I think of. I think of the fact that he was dedicated to each and every soldier. He also wrote letters to those that were in the hospital. So for me, that's where, when I saw this, I thought, oh, I gotta have that shown, yeah. When the war broke out, he was timid to maybe jump right in. He wasn't sure where he was best to be served. And I love that he was questioning, would it be better for me to stay and be a dad, or stay and be an MLA, or is it better if I go serve? So he really wrestled with that a lot. What pushed him over the edge to go were 2 things. One, his brother, who was also a lawyer and studying in Montreal, and his younger brother. His younger brother stood up to serve. And I think that made him say, oh, okay, if he's a lawyer and he's going over, maybe we could be of service. But also the fact that there were rumors to start up a Highland Brigade out of Halifax, and his sort of Scottish roots and family ties, again, the family connection, he decided that he would serve.
Colonel Ralston was just an amazing individual, and yes, he was an amazing soldier, but I think he was also an amazing individual, an amazing Nova Scotian, an amazing Canadian. His dedication and service, and the Prime Minister, not once but twice, calls upon you to join his cabinet, and you're not even an elected member of Parliament. That's what truly amazes me.
Ralston was wounded 4 times, and they included some pretty intense wounds. The first one being a shot through one leg, going through the ankle and hamstring and out the other foot. So there's a kind of an intense shrapnel wound that happens there, a gunshot wound. He also gets shot in the face, and instead of taking some time off, he just asks them to plaster his face and heads back to the unit. And so he arrives at the unit with a big plaster bandage on his face. And the 4th time was he was shot in the buttocks, and the only thing that kept him out from returning to the unit was the fact that he literally could not stand or sit down. I would say the other part of the sacrifice story that is heartbreaking is that his younger brother, who inspired him in one way to enter the war, He's with a different unit, but they eventually come together at the 85th towards the end. And when he is shot and leaves to go deal with the buttock wound, his brother is the second in command. His brother then takes command. And by the end of that day, his brother is shot and killed. So it's just their sacrifice.
Right.
The two brothers meet in a trench, and it's super dark, and they can't see anything, but they know that two different regiments are meeting, and they kind of do the squint and like, who's there? And then Ivan recognizes his brother's voice. He said, "It's me, it's Ivan." They, like in this trench in the middle of a war. "Oh, hey, how are you?" They meet up a couple of times. They share a trench Christmas dinner. There's lots of interaction between the two of them, even though they're in separate regiments.
Thank you for bringing these wonderful items in. I think Ralston is a wonderful story that needs to be shared with everyone. I know that if you're from Amherst, you know all about Ralston, because Ralston, the armory up there, is named after him, because that was where the 85th Battalion they see as their home, even though the Cape Breton Islanders perpetuate them. So I guess there's a bit of a battle between Highland regiments in Nova Scotia. But yeah, thank you so much for bringing it in so we can inform more people.
Great, thank you for having me.
It is, to me, amazing how dedicated politicians were during the time, if Ralston is an example of a politician of the wartime period. And I could only wish that we would have politicians like that today.
Coming up on Militaria.
He is by no means an angel or a saint, but he is a remarkable man given the time period.
My name is Yvonne DeYoung, and I'm here with my uncle, Kenneth Stanway. We brought in a family heirloom that was passed down many generations to my uncle. It's a 17th century pocket watch bestowed to his great-great-grandfather, Joseph Frederick Wallet de Bars. It was given to him from Colonel Wolfe's mother, sent from England many years ago.
Midway through the 7 Years' War, General James Wolfe took command of the British Army as it prepared to invade Quebec City. A career soldier from the age of 14, Wolfe was already a successful leader in the British Army, earning high praise for his cutting-edge tactical theories and firing techniques. The confident young officer was exactly what the British needed to overcome French defences in their quest for imperial dominance. On September 13th, 1759, the general and his men initiated a surprise attack on Quebec's Plains of Abraham. Although the battle cost Wolfe his life, the path he carved toward Britain's victory would lead to the surrender of New France and the founding of Canada under British rule.
Could you share with us about what it was like the day when you were young, when you found all these things up in the attic in the house at De Bar Manor?
One day, I went up there and I looked and the watch was all in the box. And then there was a box there, and I opened that up and had a red coat in it. And then you had the sword there. Well, one year I put the coat on and I got the sword on, and I was on a horseback going through the town. And we made up I wasn't quite sure what kind of hat General Wolfe had on, but we made one up, and I had that on. My Aunt Letty made it. I wish I had brought the picture and had the coat on and everything.
Sure.
Yeah.
A watch like this could weigh or cost up to 100 pounds in 1755 when he has it made. Timing now is critical to these military operations. So yeah, they would have been using this watch again to time the movements of troops. Again, like they know literally how long it takes them to get up the cliff and what time they're going to do things. So a watch and timings in regard to military operations is becoming more and more vital. So with that, again, in this nice little cabinet, this could have been, again, we know this came from England with the watch. The watch was in it. In the 18th century and into the early 19th century, a lot of people that own watches will actually sometimes keep them in these little cabinets. So the watch can be taken out, and at night, sometimes it's kept close by. Now, Was this the cabinet that General Wolfe's watch was kept in? I'd say there's a pretty good chance of that. DeBar is originally a member of the 60th Royal Americans. So DeBar, when he goes to Louisbourg, initially he thinks he's going to be serving with his battalion, as does Samuel Holland. And with that, they become extraordinary sort of advocates in regard to the gathering of intelligence. DeBar catches the eye of General Wolfe very quickly in that he goes out at night and patrols in the forward areas and will sometimes bring in French prisoners, which is no small thing. And again, they'll question them and they get information. So DeBar is not only a cartographer, but he's a pretty handy intelligence officer as well. So he's a very well-rounded young gentleman and officer. So again, this is not lost on Wolfe. And Wolfe, prior to his being killed, had promised to make sure that DeBar's sort of promotions are well seen of. Again, this is a hallmark of General Wolfe's relationship with his subordinate and brother officers, is he always tries to make sure everybody gets the proper credit. Once you study General Wolfe and you start to read between the lines of who he is, you can't help but in some ways kind of admire him as a soldier. He is a kind of a bright light and will start a new way of kind of dealing with the Army and how the Army deals with its people. Captain Cook at Louisbourg is a commander of a supply ship. And one day after the siege is conducted, Samuel Holland is tasked with doing a map of the siege works and the camps and whatnot, a recorded record of the siege of Louisbourg. And this is where Cook sees Samuel Holland doing cartography on the beach at Kennington Cove where they landed. And so with that, this is how the great sort of recorder of the oceans and so much of the world, James Cook, this is where he learns to do coastal survey work, is by a chance encounter with Samuel Holland. And again, by 1759, Cook is quite active in that wing of the branch of the service with Bastide and Holland and your ancestor DeBar. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with that, DeBar, again, in his life after the war, he'll be a famous cartographer and does an amazing map that's as much a piece of art as it is a map, is J.W. DeBar's Atlantic Neptune map, which I'm sure you've seen over the years. And I mean, to look at that, it's just an extraordinary piece of cartography. Yes, I can't thank you enough, both of you, for bringing this in. And again, as someone who has worked on archaeology sites where General Wolfe has trudged around at Louisbourg and having had the honor to look after his cloak for almost 5 years, this is a very significant thing as part of that storyline and my connection to General Wolfe. So again, many thanks for your coming in and sharing this story with us. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you
All the
very
best.
much. It was a
Thank you, too.
pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you very much. For me, I feel an immense amount of peace inside myself that finally, the story of his great-great-grandfather, to which he's so proud of, that ancestry has kind of been told. And the association to Colonel Wolfe, obviously, is amazing.